I call Todd Barclay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's a privilege to speak in support of the births, deaths, marriages and relationships registration preventing name change by child sex offenders bill in the name of Dr Jan Ying. I just want to commend the member in bringing this bill to the House. I think for not 1 minute, I don't think anybody expects this is a silver bullet in preventing sex offenders committing crimes against vulnerable children, but it is part of a suite of reforms that have been taking place over the last 6 to 9 years, and it's an important part of that, Mr Speaker. I think for the opposition not to support a piece of legislation that prevents sex offenders from reoffending and reoffending again, it's a bit funny. Not the first time they've been on the wrong side of a particular piece of legislation that puts vulnerable children or vulnerable New Zealanders first, though, Mr Speaker, and sad to say it won't be the last. With regard to the Bill of Rights Act that the Labor Party are hanging their non-support of this bill on, yes, I have. It's a fine balance between the fact that you can either support vulnerable children and provide for their ability to be able to go through life with relevant agencies and their families having access to information that could put them in harm's way, or else balancing the need of people who have actually made a decision, offended against children, and who have made those choices for themselves, and around their access to privacy. And I think if you're going to make such a move against a vulnerable child or any New Zealander in such a way, you lose part of that liberty. And what we need to be focused on is how do we prevent these people from falling into this position of reoffending. Part of it is by preventing them from changing their name. What is the motivation for changing their name? Yes, there are a lot of people in that situation that are probably rehabilitated and they want to get on with their life and they don't want to have this scar on their CV or on their life going forward. But there are others that want to be able to reoffend again. And I don't think we can be naive to look at the fact that there are some people that will use this as a loophole and opportunity to reoffend. I was working in the Minister of Education's office at the time where the ministerial inquiry into the sex offenders in schools was launched. It was a few weeks after the Minister became the Minister of Education, and you would be surprised that the level of sex offenders in our schools and across this country. There are over 50,000 people that work in the education sector, and there are a lot of people that are in this position that their names come up again. We've heard a number of examples today of people who have been in that position who have offended in schools once and they've offended again. It's not just schools. What we're trying to do, though, is add to the suite of policy that prevents people from reoffending, prevents the likelihood and the ability for them to reoffend, but also to protect vulnerable children, Mr Speaker, because that's what it's all about. We know that in 2014 there were 451 offenders convicted of a child sex offence. 307 of those were sentenced to imprisonment. And last year there were 294 sex offenders who were released back into the community. There's a good chance that most of those probably won't offend again, but how do I know? How do you know? How does anybody know which of those offenders are likely to reoffend or which ones aren't going to reoffend? Most of them have probably undergone some form of rehabilitation while they've been in prison. To what extent that has worked, who knows? Down to the individual who is being released into the community. And we simply don't know that. And the fact is that we can't be putting these people back into the community through the best will of the world, without knowing for a fact that they're not going to reoffend again. It's simply not good enough to be able to say, oh well, they've undergone some form of rehabilitation, they've said they're not going to reoffend, we trust them, we'll just let them loose into a community. Could be my neighbour, could be your neighbour, Mr Speaker, could be anybody's neighbour.
Drag me into it.
And that's the point, I think. We need to have a level of security and safety in our communities, and that's what this piece of legislation does. It adds to that. It's not the silver bullet, but it's as a part of a wide and impressive suite of reforms that have taken place over the last 6 years. So I'd like to congratulate the member and look forward to following it through a successful passage through the House.
Well done.